recording. Does it show anything like
The
that?
sound quality is okay?
Yeah, the sound quality is pretty good. Yeah, I can hear you guys. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, closer that you get to the microphone. Computer microphones are notoriously, not the best, but
That's not creepy
most
at all.
co-authors, barely talk to each other after the book. Good to see you guys are so cozy. So tell me, where are you guys right now? So I'm speaking with Jorge Cham and Daniel Whiteson, authors of the fantastic, but this is going to become a collector's item soon because this is the hardcover.
Oh, yes.
And we at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination are delighted to be hosting an event on May 8th, 2018, which is the launch of your paperback. So
Yes,
anyway,
very excited.
what are you guys up to? And we're going to talk a lot about the book. I know you guys are pressed for time. You're doing a bunch of media tours, but tell me what's going on. What brings you guys to New York City?
Yeah, we're here this week we gave a talk at the American Museum of Natural History yesterday at the Hayden Planetarium.
Oh, very
It
nice.
was fun.
But we did not meet Neil deGrasse Tyson.
We did not meet Neil, although we walked past his office.
We did, yes.
Yes.
And we left a cartoon for him.
That's right.
Oh, you did?
That's as close as we got. That's as close as we got.
Yeah. Any closer, it costs you a lot of money. It costs you a lot of money.
That's right.
We don't have the budget to get any closer.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had to do it after hours. I think
That's
if you
true.
during regular working hours, it's more.
Uh-huh.
But then we're also doing a Pi Day event with Atlas Obscura, which is a great kind of science outreach event organization. And so,
Okay.
yeah, that's why we're in New York.
Oh, very
I'm
cool.
going to talk at Columbia also. They have a science series there called Science on the Hudson. That's one of these great science communities they've built. In traveling around, we found that a lot of places have really done the work over the years to build a community of people in the public interested in science.
Mm-hmm.
And when you build that community with a series of lectures, then they can be really responsive. And places where they haven't done that yet, it's much harder to reach the people who are interested in this kind of stuff because the community just hasn't formed. Great examples are like Ann Arbor, Saturday morning physics lectures. We had like hundreds and hundreds of people show up on a Saturday morning, freezing cold, to talk about physics.
So, yeah, so it's great when these local communities come together, You just get
Yeah.
excited about science and learning about new books and stuff.
Yeah, but it's the hard work of the local organizers who spent all that time building these communities and these networks, and it's impressive. So we just use them to tell our books, though. Of course.
Well, you're going to be you'll be
Right.
having an opportunity to shill the paperback when you're here because you just described exactly what we do here at the Arthur C. Clarke Center. So we have lectures. We have this podcast, which is the only one of the few podcasts within the University of California that I'm aware of, and we have public lectures and events where we bring in scientists, science fiction authors. We've had Sir Roger Penrose was just here a month ago. Freeman Dyson, I just did an interview with him. So we're gonna bring together some of those in the conversation that we have today. And then when you're here on May 8th for the book
Wonderful.
signing,
Yeah, looking forward to that.
We're looking forward to a wonderful event. So I want to talk to you guys first about your day jobs, and then we'll get into the writing and the collaborative process that you guys have turned out so well. Really a unique book in many ways. I mean, there have been books written about science by comic art authors, and there have been science books written by scientists with with dry illustrations. But rarely has it been where two scientists have gotten together and done a work of creative graphic art the way that this is. And I wanted to first get a background on the two of you individually. So Jorge, you're originally from Panama, which I believe is correct. Are you guys still there?
Yep, that's right. I was born and raised in Panama, and then I studied robotics here in the U.S.
All right, you got your PhD from Stanford. Yeah.
That's right, Stanford. And but then what happened was, while I was getting my PhD in robotics, I started drawing comics. I started drawing something called PhD comics, about higher and deeper. And as I sort of kept going the academic track, the comics kind of became more popular than the research I was doing. And so that's what I do now full time, is just draw comics and do writing and work on different projects.
And as I understood it, the comic sort of took off virally. You weren't trying to sell it or market it or anything originally. It just spread by word of mouth around campuses. What do you think made it so appealing to your fellow students? You must have been speaking the truth.
Well, I think that's the power of a good comic strip is, it kind of portrays a truth, or truths that, are maybe people aren't sort of open to talk about openly. And so I think that's what people connected to, is this idea that here's somebody writing about the academic process, but in a maybe slightly irreverent way, or in a way that was kind of funny, adding humor to academia, where I think was not necessarily a natural combination.
Making fun of professors, mostly.
Making fun.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get to that in a second, Daniel. Don't worry. But yeah, so I mean, it's kind of, you capture in the strip. I mean, sometimes I've even heard you compare yourself to, Scott Adams, Dilbert. But in a way, I mean, yours is it's very highbrow in a sense, and it's very existentially sometimes full of the dread and ennui that students, and I remember, what it was like to be a grad student. But I mean, I have to ask, was your grad student experience, anything like that, which you depict with a character that vaguely resembles you sometimes?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely, I think, the core of the strip is sort of that question. It's like, why would a really intelligent, rational person pursue an academic career? It's not necessarily the most highest paid job out there, and there's a lot of struggle and a lot of, challenges in terms of coming up with ideas and making ideas work, and there's kind of this big built-in uncertainty. You never know if the science you're working on is going to pay off, or you never know if the project you're working on is actually going to work. So yeah, I think that's what people got attracted to, and definitely it was my experience. Kind of going into grad school, I thought I was pretty smart, but then now you're suddenly in a pool of really, really extra smart people, and so just kind of going through that ego check and going through that kind of realization of your limits, really, and also just kind of the kind of funny dynamics that happen in academia, I think are what make the strip relatable to people.
And what do you find? Is it more challenging? I mean, the thing that I remember most about, all the academic levels, starting from undergraduate to graduate to postdoc to assistant professor, you keep your social cohort kind of decreases, exponentially at each level. And I wonder, are you working nowadays in isolation? Besides the collaboration with Daniel, do you mainly work by yourself? And if so, how do you handle those kind of, different environments, as opposed to grad school, where you've got at least a lot of people are suffering around you?
No, yeah, I think, there's people around in grad school, but it's still a very isolating experience. It's like it's you and your advisor, and really nobody else in the world knows what you're working on at a specific level, and what kind of uncertainties are in your project. And so I think academia is, even though you're surrounded by people, it's still a very kind of isolating experience. And there's a lot of parallels with cartooning. I still work in my pajamas mostly. Late at night and things like that. So
I enforce a strict no pajamas rule in the lab, but so Daniel,
you're no fun.
We could commiserate about what it was like to be a graduate student, but I think it might be interesting to get. I mean, what about Jorge's comics in the movie in which the movie on which the comic strip on which the movie was based on, and I understand there's a second version of that. So what is it like being on this other side of the desk? Kind of Jorge always depicts, the grad student, and then the wise, bearded, white-haired. So you don't have the white hair. You've got the white sun. You don't have the white hair. Got the nice beard.
Got the beard, though. That beard has grown since I've known him.
I'm attempting some last year. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, with tenure comes massive hairceutical privileges. So Daniel, what's it like for those the uninitiated? What's it like to be a real professor, as you are?
I think it's the best job in the world, honestly. I mean, I just get to think about questions that are interesting to me. Mostly, I think about the questions and then spin them off to my students and grads and postdocs who take them and actually run with them and execute them. I think it's a lot of fun. It's great freedom, great intellectual freedom. Nobody's telling me what to do every day, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I get to goof off on side projects if I want, like this fantastic collaboration with Jorge. So
Right.
I had no idea when I was in grad school, when I was an undergrad, what being a professor was like. But I'm pretty glad I went down this road because in my view, it's the best job in the world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So both of you guys, I think what is a hallmark for both of you fellows is that you're both great storytellers. I've had the opportunity to see Daniel live and in person, and we're looking forward to your event here on May 8th. And I've seen Jorge, I've seen your TED Talk and so forth. What about that commonality? I mean, do you think, I mean, mostly Daniel professors are depicted as, you know, pretty dry, boring, you know, erudite, but intellectual yet, you know, unintelligible. How do you, I mean, did you take any training? Is there anything that you did in your career, you know, to accentuate the extroverted aspect of your personality? Because, I mean, we both know not every professor may share the delightful things that we enjoy about academia, but they're not all as good at pointing out to the public it's such an elucidated, you know, in such an easy fashion as you are. What do you attribute that to?
I think it takes a lot of practice, honestly, and I think people don't recognize that. And you're right, as professors, we don't get much training or practice. But when I was in high school, I did a lot of debating and extemporaneous speaking, where you have to be sharp-witted and on your feet. And especially there's a kind of debate called parliamentary debate, where there's a lot of zingers back and forth, and you're interrupting each other, and you know, some witticisms, etc. And you get the crowd riled up and stuff.
It's a genre of debate.
Oh yeah, and the crowd boos and hisses and stuff. It's modeled after the British Parliament, with actually
Parliament, yeah.
They yell at each other, and you have to come up with clever things to defend yourself. I did a lot of that in college.
Nowadays in the U.S., we just do that on Twitter, right? The government just does.
Yeah, or live TV. Yeah,
live TV. That's right.
So I'm actually, personally, I'm much more of an introvert, but I've practiced a lot to try to be an engaging speaker and to try to have fun up there and relax. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, big.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You know, I really started with public speaking, but a big turning point for me was when I was TAing a class, and I was co-teaching a class, and my other co-teacher said that to really look at how stand-up comedians do it. You know, just in terms of how they engage with the public, how they hold themselves, and then just how they're able to tell a story, like a long discourse, but also with interesting kind of asides and things like that. And then, but mostly just like how to have fun up there, you know? And so for me, like studying stand-up comics and seeing how, you know, just make it fun and just make it sort of like having a conversation, but also, you know, you also kind of have to really structure it really well in your head. But yeah, just mostly go up there and have fun. I think
that's funny. Before I had a chance to do a TEDx talk about 4 years ago, and before I did it, I did a Comedy Store 2-minute, 3-minute long stand-up comedy routine here in La Jolla. Maybe we'll take you guys there for the after-hours show on May 8th. But
you did a comic stand-up routine?
I did a 3-minute thing. And I said, if I'm going to bomb in front of, the whole world on TED, I want to bomb first in front of, a couple hundred drunk people. So I did that. And I realized I actually prefer the stand-up comedy, club to most lecture halls. I mean, for one thing, there's a 2-drink minimum. And that was really nice to have, most of my students only come in with 1 drink.
Class.
That's right. Yeah, usually they only drink 1 drink before they come to class, and then
or 50 the night before.
And I started, to develop new insights into pedagogy. With I from now on, I decided that I'm only going to have a bouncer in each one of my lectures, in case make sure no Facebooking and tweeting of your comics. So speaking of comics, one thing I think Jorge, you speak a lot of truth in your, as I said, there's a lot of truth in ennui and existential dread in your comics. But I think, if you were to do that in another form, the way that you do it in the comic form, I think it robs it of some of the pain and actually gives it the ring. Adds to the ring of truth. And I'm wondering, did that always resonate with you? I mean, you could have been an artist, depicting in more realistic form. I've seen, very detailed, scientific drawings that you've made. So what about the comic format that appeals to you most?
I just think it's magic. I kind of grew up early on in my childhood, I was exposed to a lot of comic strips, a lot of comic books, and a lot of comic collections. And so I just think the whole thing is really magic, the way you can, like you say, you can kind of pass up a little bit of truth, but also kind of mask it in these characters and make it sort of lighthearted. I just think there's a certain magic to that.
Mm-hmm.
And people also are really accepting of it. They're happy to read a comic and to absorb something from it. It's not an intimidating form of communication for whatever reason. They associate it with childhood or with goofy superheroes or something, but their inhibitions, their barriers are let down when they're reading comics.
Yeah.
Which is one reason I thought it would be a good fit for communicating science, because there are a lot of very understandable ideas, but when you start telling people, I'm going to tell you some physics, they immediately start thinking, I'm not going to understand. I hated
Shut
physics.
up my brain.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could just get around that, make people feel like, don't worry, you're going to get it. Just stick with us. And I think that's a big part of the hurdle in communicating physics to people.
Did it simplify things that Jorge had a technical for you, Daniel? I mean, explaining science and actually, Jorge, you've done comics about explaining science to the public and kind of this, I call it this, instead of the military industrial complex, it's kind of the academia and journalism, complex where everything has to be really hyped up it has to be, huge major breakthrough in the treatment of toe fungus, and that has to go viral. And then of course, my pet
it always has to make you healthier or something, right?
Right. Or major finding,
controversy. Or end the world.
Right. Or so was it when you were working with Jorge, Daniel, like, was it easy? I mean, was it easier that he had such a strong technical background as opposed to, most illustrators you would have had to probably explain a lot more to, and did that liberate the creative bandwidth for you guys to work together, that Jorge had such a strong technical background?
Oh, I think it was essential, yeah. One thing that I noticed very early on was that he just never stopped asking questions until he actually understood. I think part of that was he imagined it was possible to understand, and he wanted to penetrate through all the layers of jargon, like actually explain simply. And the first time we hung out, we spent like 4 or 5 or 6 hours talking about one topic in science. He just recorded the whole thing. If you go back and listen to it, you can see there's times when he's like just pressing me and pressing me and pressing me. And so I think that's what makes it, part of it, what makes it successful, is that we really make a connection all the way down to those accessible ideas. And that was part of the process of our book, is that I would start and write something which I thought was accessible and I thought was interesting and I thought had the right take on it. And he'd be like, no, I don't get it. Or let's, I don't get this first bit in this first paragraph, this first page, explain that more. And that was great, because then, like, for example, we were talking about gravity, and, I this stuff about space. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Okay, let's talk about that more. And that whole conversation turned into a chapter about space. And later I realized that's a great idea. Let's just have a whole chapter. What is space? It's a really simple, basic question and fascinating. Yeah. So a lot of that came out of
You finally found a professor, Jorge, who had to answer your questions. Who would see you outside of the office hour.
Once he signed.
And then I've heard him do this with other people too. There's this recording he has of a time he was on the bus with the Higgs convener of Atlas, Elam Gross, and he's asking him questions, and he's like, explain to me, what is symmetry? And Elam is struggling. And this is Elam Gross. He's like, he's a good scientist, high profile, and he's a good speaker, and he's like struggling to find the words. And he says things in that clip. He's like, you make me invent these words because you ask me these questions. And that's what I think a good science journalist should do, like actually insist that things be explained. I think a lot of science journalism falls short of that standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Possible, partly because Jorge had a technical background.
Yeah.
So, also, they probably have a deadline and can't afford to spend 4 hours talking to a physicist.
That's right. Yeah, you got mouths to feed.
But unemployed cartoonists all the time in the world.
That's right. Yeah, tenured professor. Right.
I don't think I had tenure at the time when we started, actually.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Wow.
When we warmed up, I was still an assistant professor. Yeah.
That was a big risk for you.
Oh, yeah. Everything on the line.
Yeah. Wow. And now you've
had I known,
you would have gotten.
I would have cared less.
You would have charged more.
That's right. Because didn't you find Jorge? Didn't you basically commission him to explain, as you felt, these lacunae in the discussion of the Higgs boson in the early part of this decade? Is that correct, Daniel? That you basically just blind pitched Jorge out of the blue and tried to commission him to work on an explainer for the Higgs boson?
Yeah, I just cold emailed him. I mean, I've been a fan for years, and my wife has been a fan. And actually, I read a different technical comic. It was a comic about the development of the Chrome browser done by Scott McCloud. And like, I'm not that into Chrome, how to write a browser, but this comic did a good job of making it interesting, like to somebody who's in a totally different field. So I thought, well, if they can do that for like developing a browser, or like, what's the big question there? What's the pull the hook, right? There's nothing. Then comics can do it for physics, where I think there's a lot of big hooks. But I didn't have the artistic skills myself, and so I was like, well, I'll just email a celebrity and see if he writes back.
Right.
Cartoonists do write back when you offer them money.
Well, I tried that with Banksy, but he didn't write back.
Oh, yeah? Do you have his email address?
I have his.
You just write it on walls around town, or how do you get in touch with him?
No, I wish. So speaking of art, Jorge, one thing we explore down here in San Diego at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination is whether or not creativity, imagination, artistry can be taught. And I'm curious, both of you guys, but first, Jorge, could you teach someone to be a good artist? Can you teach, if you just took somebody like me who has no artistic skills, I mean, could you do it? Could you make me into a Jorge Cham?
No.
At least you're honest.
I'm not so, I don't know if you can teach somebody to be an artist, but I think you can definitely, compel them to practice a lot. And so I would say that, I would say it's mostly about practice and doing it a lot, but more importantly, having kind of that perspective of being open and self-critical, and just having that internal desire to sort of learn the craft and know what it takes, how to recognize what people respond to. So I'm not quite sure that it's something you can really teach, but you can definitely compel people or give them an opportunity to do it a lot. One of the biggest advice I give people is commit yourself to doing it to somebody, so you have a deadline, so you have a reason, so you feel bad if you don't make the deadline, kind of thing. So for me, I think the only reason I really kept doing it was because I was doing it for this student newspaper. And they were actually paying me a few bucks. So, and there was a deadline. So I just had to keep churning it out, So I think if I didn't have that deadline, I would probably just never really produce anything. And so then that gets you to the habit, and then that gets you to really practice a lot.
I know deadlines are important to Jorge because he always turns stuff in immediately before the deadline. The last possible second.
Which gives me maximum time to work on it, right? Technically,
it's
if
for
you
the
think
creative
about
process.
it. Yes.
Daniel, can you teach somebody to be a great physicist?
Teach someone to be a great physicist?
Yeah, can you teach
I hope so.
Yeah, can you
I
teach
hope so.
someone
I'm
to
doing
be...
that with all my grad students right now.
And how do you do it? What's your... Yeah, exactly. So what would you do? I mean, are there things that you could do to ensure the creativity? Because, I mean, a lot of being a scientist is being creative and being inventive. Yeah. Being an artist, even though, like you said, we don't really ever get training on how to teach. We don't get training on how to do research. So how do you, it's mostly taught from advisor to advisee. So how do you inculcate that curiosity, the creativity in your students?
It's a great question. I think about that a lot because most of my students are members of the Atlas collaboration, which means we're in a 5,000 person collaboration where a lot of things have been done for you. And a lot of things have been done, almost everything's been done already. And if you're not careful, your students can just fall into a rut, repeating something somebody's done before and not really learning anything. So in my group, I make a lot of particular strides to avoid that. And one thing I do is we have this exercise every 6 months, and we call it the Crazy Ideas Meeting, where everybody has to come in with at least 1 or 2 ideas for a new experiment. Like, think of a question you want answered about the universe, and then propose an experiment. No limitations on cost or practicality or whatever, galaxy colliders and this kind of crazy stuff. And then we think about it. We take it, we say, well, okay, how would you do that? How much would it cost? Would it actually work? And some of my students take to this right away, and they come in with great ideas. And actually, our Cosmic Ray smartphone app came out of that meeting where somebody suggested this idea. And we thought about it. Well, could we make that work? Let's think it through and do the calculations. And we couldn't demonstrate to ourselves that it wouldn't work. So we decided, let's actually try to do it. And other times people had crazy ideas like, let's use the Atlas instrumented area as a direct detection experiment. Like we have a bunch of protons in there, and what if there's a WIMP wind, maybe they'll interact. We'll see them. And so we did the calculations. But the point is that I have to specifically poke them and prod them. And some students never take to it. They feel very uncomfortable, and they show up and they have no ideas, and they never suggest anything. So I think some students are just not good at it. Other students can learn. If you poke them and insist, then they become good. I think you can learn to think broadly and relax your mind. Yeah.
And then I know you guys are on a tight deadline today, so I have a couple of questions to finish up with. So one is one that I wondered if you could, could pay. It's okay. If you could pay, God or your favorite spirit or, whatever to answer one of the questions, one of the chapters, except for chapter 13, which one would each one of you both like, most like to know the answer to? So,
you mean questions from the book?
Yeah. Which would you like to have an idea? And we have no idea. The chapters are all very, very provocatively titled things like who is shooting particles at the Earth, what is time, what is space, what is gravity, and I'm wondering, if you could get an audience with your, the creator, if you believe in such an entity, or just get the answer, sent in an email to you. What would you most of all these questions, of all these great questions, which one would you most like to get the answer to?
What's God's email address?
It's
at everything.all.
Banksy at. Well, I think I've already sort of chosen, because I decided to dedicate my life to particle physics and breaking down matter into smaller and smaller pieces. And it's sort of stereotypical, or it's a trite story, but I really have been wondering about that question since I was a kid. Like, what is everything made out of? What is the smallest particle? So to me, it's the kind of question which, if you knew the answer, would change the way you felt about the universe. Like, is there a smallest thing, or does it go on forever with smaller and smaller particles? I would desperately love to actually know the answer to that question. And it kills me that there is an answer. Right? There is a factual answer, and it's out there. It's determined. You just don't know it. One day humans might know it. It's the kind of thing that makes me want to freeze my head for 5,000 years so I can be resuscitated in 5,000 years when we learn the answer. Yeah, keep it weird. And that's possible. You could conceivably do that. You could fast forward your way through scientific progress to the future and learn the answer to one of these questions. That's a little bit tempting to me sometimes.
Absolutely.
Cool. And I think for me, the question I would want to answer is, it's kind of a tie between, are we alone in the universe? So we have a chapter in the book that kind of talks about the how people think about the question of whether there are other intelligent beings in the universe. That one, and also there's a chapter we have about how big is the universe. And just the question, like, is the universe infinitely big, or does it have kind of an edge to it, or does it curve around on itself? So I think if those are the two questions I would love to have answered.
And then the last thing, you guys sort of epitomize this, there's always this a dichotomy that's spoken about in popular circles, the left brain and the right brain. And I can never remember which brain I am, and that probably means I'm one of the brains, but I can't recall which one. But that's right, bird brain. Yeah, my mom named me Brain, only because it was an anagram for Brian, hoping it would get me some extra IQ points. But do you see the arts and science, as reconcilable in the sense that, can art influence science? Can science influence art? We have a great many of our patron saint, if you will, Arthur C. Clarke is of course, a great scientist and a great writer, author. what do you see as the future of these two cultures? I mean, do you think they're destined to sort of meld together more, or do you think the most fruitful avenue is perhaps some sort of union of the two, as you guys have begun to initiate?
Ooh, I have some thoughts about that. I think that I don't think a union is what's necessary. I think there's sort of a happy ecosystem where they support each other. And I think science fiction, for example, drives science in a lot of ways. I view science fiction writers as sort of like proto-theorists. Like, here's the kind of world I'd like to imagine. Could we do this? Maybe the world works in this way.
Right.
And there's lots of examples where ideas started in science fiction and then came actually directly to science. And then the other way, we discover something crazy in science, and then there's a bunch of science fiction about it. Like, how many books are there now about like AI takeovers and this kind of stuff? They definitely influence each other. And on the literary side and on the artistic side, I think one of the great sources of artistic inspiration is just the sheer beauty of the universe. I mean, you're an astrophysics person. Like, look at the incredible beauty of the universe, and you have to wonder, like, did it have to be that way? Could we have been humans that evolved that thought the universe was ugly? Could somebody look at these galaxies and say, yuck, what a mess, right? Or look at the Grand Canyon and think like, oh, I wish this was just smooth and featureless. Is it something about being human? Is it something about the universe itself? I think a lot of these scientific discoveries inspire artistic reactions. And also, in science, artistic and aesthetic preferences guide us. If you talk to theorists in particle physics, they say, this theory is beautiful, that theory is ugly. Right? They prefer theories that have some sort of structure to them that they aesthetically like. And it's those theorists and their aesthetic choices about how they think the universe should work that often guides the research we do. So they
you mentioned in the book, Dirac was guided, he said you should be guided by finding, it's more important your equations are beautiful than that they're right.
Yeah.
He also had a lot of negative things to say about poets and art. I think he was a deeply closeted poet, and
is that right?
I've come out on record about that. He wanted to be a poet so badly that when he failed at it, his consolation prize was the Nobel Prize, but it's still never unrequited love of verse.
Literature, not physics.
That's right. He wanted it in literature. All right, guys. Good. Jorge, do you have any final thoughts about the melding of cultures, or do you find inspiration from science, or do you feel like science can be inspired by art, or both?
Well, I think that there's definitely, they have different goals, The goal of science is very different than the goal of art. At the core, it's about truth, I think, but maybe one is more objective truth and the other one is subjective truth. But I think, I agree with Daniel. I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of inspiration and imagination and, just kind of personal inspiration to do it. But at the end, though, I think there are different, they have different goals, but there's definitely a lot of kind of areas in between,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much. I know you're super busy today. I want to thank you, Jorge Cham and Daniel Whiteson, authors of We Have No Idea, the last hardcover version. I'm going to get you guys to sign it when you're here on May 8th. And we're going to celebrate the release of We Have No Idea in paperback. And then talk about what's coming next. I want to see and find out the future of you guys. Is there We Have No Idea 2, TOO, or is there number 2? So we'll see. We'll be excited to find out.
I was going to mention the website in case anyone's interested. It's wehavenoidea.com. So just wehavenoidea.com.
And actually, we do have a project coming up, which is a podcast. We're launching a podcast to talk about a lot of the things we didn't get to talk about in the book and other stuff. And it's a very humble name to it. It's called Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe. Mostly us talking about science and yucking it up. And so I hope your listeners will be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll certainly promote that through our podcast. We welcome the competition. We're not scared of anything here. Looking forward to it.
Grow the pie.
That's right. Grow the pie of what we have no idea about. Thank you guys so much. All right, I'm going to stop.
Wonderful talking to you.
Ryan.
Thank you. And